Think about the last time someone told you to be professional. What do they actually mean? Don't show emotion, dress a certain way, speak in a particular tone, use specific language. Here's what's fascinating. If you ask 10 different people to define professional behavior, you'll get 10 different answers. Yet somehow, we all instinctively know when someone's being unprofessional, or at least we think we do. Right now, millions of workers are code switching every day, changing how they speak, dress, wear their hair, and express themselves to fit some invisible standard of professionalism. Women are told not to be too emotional, while men are praised for being passionate in some situations. People with non-Western names anglicize them on resumes. Natural hairstyles are deemed unprofessional in some workplaces, while straight hair is considered the default professional look. Ever see the cover of my first book, Career Mapping? Yep, that was me, professional look 15 years ago. Relaxed, colored hair and all. But here's the question nobody's really asking. Who decides what counts as professional in the first place? And more importantly, whose culture, whose class, background, whose way of being in the world became the template that everyone else had to conform to? The answer is going to make you uncomfortable. Hi, I'm Jenny Clark, a conscious leadership expert who spent 2 decades in executive recruiting and talent management, having worked with giants like Google and Spencer Stuart. I discovered that the secret to transformative leadership lies in the 5 dimensions of conscious leadership. And I'm here to help you unlock your full potential. Join me on this channel as we embark on an honest and vulnerable journey together to become the kind of leader that genuinely inspires transformation in your organization. I have a few ways you can get involved in this conscious community. First, I've created a free career map to help you uncover your next career move. Second, I've created exclusive content for you with a community of like-minded leaders. And lastly, I send out a free newsletter every other week. To learn more, check out the description of this video. Professionalism isn't some neutral set of workplace behaviors that emerged organically. It is a specific cultural code that was deliberately constructed to maintain existing power structures. And it worked so well that we didn't even question it anymore. Let's go back to England in the 1800s, where the concept of professional first took shape in a way we'd recognize today. At this time, society was rigidly divided by class. You had the aristocracy at the top, people who didn't work because they had inherited wealth and land. Below them were what they called the professional classes: doctors, lawyers, clergy, military officers. Here's what's crucial to understand. These early professionals weren't just doing specialized work. They were distinguishing themselves from tradespeople, from manual workers. A doctor wasn't just someone who treated illness, he was a gentleman who happened to practice medicine. The distinction mattered enormously. So the early professional classes created elaborate codes of conduct specifically designed to signal that they belonged to the educated, cultured upper classes rather than the working classes. They developed specific ways of speaking, formal, elaborate language that required education to master. They dressed in particular ways, formal attire that would be completely impractical for manual work. They cultivated certain mannerisms, restraint, and emotional control that they called deportment. When these ideas came to America, they took on additional layers. The late 1800s saw massive immigration and the growth of industrial capitalism. Suddenly you had people from dozens of different cultural backgrounds working together in offices and factories. The question became, how do we create order and hierarchy in this diverse environment? The answer was Americanization programs and professional standards that were explicitly designed to reshape immigrant workers into a specific cultural mold. Settlement houses and corporate training programs taught immigrants not just job skills, but how to dress properly and speak correctly and behave appropriately, which meant adopting white Anglo-Saxon Protestant cultural norms. This was not subtle. There are documented training programs in the early 1900s that specifically taught Eastern European and Italian immigrants to suppress their excessive hand gestures and emotional expressiveness. Companies had explicit policies against workers speaking languages other than English, even during breaks. And then women entered the professional workforce in significant numbers, and professionalism codes adapted to maintain male dominance. Women were told they needed to dress conservatively to be taken seriously, but not too masculine or they'd be considered unfeminine. They should speak up, but not too assertively, or they'd be called shrill or bossy. Research from this era shows that the same assertive behaviors, praised as leadership in men, were consistently labeled aggressive or emotional in women. I've seen it. The professional standards was based on traditionally masculine behavioral norms. Then women were judged by how well they could approximate those norms while still performing femininity. The civil rights movement forced some examination of these standards, but often the response was to simply add diversity or DEI while maintaining the same behavioral expectations. Black employees were told they could be hired if they were well-spoken, which meant sounding white. Natural black hairstyles like afros and braids were deemed unprofessional through the 1970s and beyond. There's a particularly telling court case from 1981, Rogers versus American Airlines, where the court actually ruled that banning braids and cornrows wasn't racial discrimination because those hairstyles were a cultural choice, not a racial characteristic. The professional standard was so normalized that courts literally couldn't see how it privileged one racial group's cultural norms over others. It took until 2019 for this injustice to be formally addressed when California passed the Crown Act, creating a respectful and open world for natural hair. The law explicitly protects people from discrimination based on natural hair texture and protective hairstyles like braids and bantu knots. Since then, over 20 states have passed similar legislation, finally recognizing what should have been obvious all along, that policies against natural black hairstyles were inherently racially discriminatory, not neutral professional standards. The fact that it took nearly 40 years and required specific legislation to overturn that 1981 ruling shows just how deeply these biased professionalism standards were embedded in our legal and workplace systems. Fast forward to today, and we're still operating under many of these assumptions, just with slightly updated language. We call it culture fit now instead of Americanization. We talk about executive presence instead of proper deportment. But we're still enforcing cultural conformity to a standard that was explicitly designed by and for a specific demographic, white male upper class professionals. The insidious thing is how invisible this has become. When someone says that's unprofessional, they genuinely believe they're identifying some objective violation of workplace norms. They don't see that they're enforcing a specific cultural standard that excludes other equally valid ways of being competent and effective at work. So I asked AI systems to analyze what professionalism would look like if we designed it from scratch today, without the historical baggage of class, gender, and racial hierarchies. What behaviors actually predict workplace effectiveness versus which ones just signal cultural conformity? The responses were fascinating and honestly pretty challenging to our current assumptions. First, AI suggested that we've confused competence markers with cultural markers. Yeah, of course. When we say someone is unprofessional, we're often not describing actual job performance, we're describing cultural differences. Being direct versus indirect, showing emotion versus restraint, casual versus formal dress. None of these actually correlate with job effectiveness, that they heavily influence who gets hired, promoted, and taken seriously. One AI analysis pointed something uncomfortable. The behaviors we label professional are often the ones that require economic privilege to learn. Formal business attire costs money. The ability to work unpaid internships requires financial support. Networking depends on having access to certain social circles. Even professional communication often means mastering the linguistic patterns of educated upper middle class speakers. AI suggested that truly effective workplace standards would focus on outcomes rather than behaviors. Can you do the work? Do you collaborate effectively with your team? Do you communicate clearly on your particular stakeholders? These might have very different answers depending on context. The AI painted this picture. What if professionalism meant being effective in your particular role with your particular colleagues and clients rather than conforming to a universal behavioral template? A social worker might need completely different interpersonal skills than a software engineer. A salesperson in Brooklyn might need to communicate differently than one in Tokyo. Why do we pretend there's one professional way to be? What really struck me about this AI analysis is how much our current professionalism standards are about signaling and gatekeeping rather than actual job performance. When you have to adopt a particular accent or hairstyle, wardrobe to be taken seriously, that's not about doing good work. That's about demonstrating that you belong to or can successfully imitate a particular social class. And here's the cost. We're losing talent, perspective, and innovation by enforcing conformity to standards that have nothing to do with actual capability. How many brilliant people have you filtered out because they couldn't or wouldn't behave in a way that was deemed to be professional, as we've defined it? So here we are, operating under behavioral codes that were literally designed in the 1800s to maintain class hierarchies and later adapted to enforce racial and gender conformity. And we call it professionalism, like some neutral, obvious standard rather than a specific cultural framework. But I want to hear from you about your experience with this. Have you ever been told you're unprofessional in ways that felt like code for too different from me? Have you had to code switch at work? Change how you speak, dress, or express yourself to fit in? Bet you have. Or maybe you're someone who's always felt comfortable with professional standards and you're realizing for the first time that these standards were designed to advantage people like you. What does that feel like to recognize? Here's what I'm really curious about. If we started over, what would workplace behavioral standards look like? What actually matters for doing good work versus what's just cultural performance? And for those of you in leadership positions making judgments about who's professional enough to hire or promote, are you evaluating actual competence, or are you unconsciously enforcing cultural conformity to standards that exclude people who don't share your background? Look, I'm not saying anything goes at work or that there shouldn't be any behavioral expectations, but maybe it's time we got honest about where our professional standards came from and who they were designed to serve. Maybe it's time to distinguish between behaviors that actually matter for job effectiveness and behaviors that just signal this person is like me, so I'm comfortable with them. Drop a comment and tell me what professional standards have you had to conform to that had nothing to do with your actual ability to do the job? Or if you've ever had to code switch at work, what made that possible? If this conversation challenged your thinking about workplace norms, hit that like button. Share it with someone who might benefit from understanding the origins of professionalism. And subscribe for more explorations of workplace assumptions that deserve questioning. Until next time, remember, competence comes in many cultural packages. The question is whether we're brave enough to recognize it when it doesn't look like we're used to. You ready? Let's get to work. I know firsthand how taking that first step can be the catalyst for life-changing transformation. I remember the moment I decided to harness my own strengths, and it made all the difference in my career. That's why I've created a career mapping tool just for you to help you uncover your unique competencies and leverage them to design your own career map. Take the first step toward your next level by clicking the link in the video description. And let's start this incredible journey together.